In the early days of MMA, there was some contention as to whether or not head movement would be an effective tool in the octagon. With the threat of knees and head kicks, it would make sense that head movement would be at far greater risk of being countered than in Western boxing. Although punches had certainly been slipped prior to his UFC debut, the tide would turn with the success of Anderson Silva and his 16-fight winning streak. Other fighters have also made great use of head movement in MMA. Although it is often described in terms of three broad categories, when you start to zoom in on technical details, there could be 5 or 6 defined categories of head movement which are used in Western boxing and which can be applied to MMA. For the purposes of this video, I am going to focus on 4. These are slipping towards your opponent, pulling back away from your opponent, rolling or weaving under your opponent's punches, and also swaying side to side at neutral distance to your opponent. So first, to get into the more controversial swaying side to side style of head movement. You will sometimes hear people say that everything in boxing begins with the legs. However, when you look at the footage and when you hear the instruction of some experienced boxing coaches, it is possible and even preferable in some situations to begin an evasion at the waist. For instance, when you look at Mike Tyson, as a 5'10" heavyweight, he is one of the best exponents of head movement ever in boxing. It would be true to say that staying elusive, he sometimes made great use of his lower body. However, it would also be true to say that he also sometimes dodged punches beginning at the waist. Joey Hadley is another boxer who trained under Mike Tyson's trainer Cus D'amato. He has described in detail the way that he and Tyson were taught to slip punches. To quote a Hadley Reddit post where he describes the peekaboo style, he says, quote, "Slipping is done from the torso without moving the legs in the motion." He goes on to clarify, slipping to the middle or down to avoid a punch involves only your legs so that your head and torso stay squared and your eyes never have to leave your opponent, which is why Cus never taught his boxers to do the typical bob and weave that obscures your vision. For a full description of the Cus D'amato / Mike Tyson slipping style, I will leave a link in the description to the Hadley Reddit post, and you can also check out his YouTube channel. As you can see, Tyson is not the only boxer who has avoided punches by swaying at the waist. The advantages of this slipping style as it applies to MMA are that as your body is neutral to your opponent, you are not bringing your upper body into the firing line where you can get hit with knees or head kicks. Furthermore, bouncing has made its way to the elite level as a footwork style that carries its own strengths and weaknesses. The swaying style of head movement can be used well in conjunction with the bounce, as unlike other forms of head movement, the movement takes place predominantly at the waist, as described before. The disadvantages of this head movement style are that whilst you can make your opponent miss, you are not in an obvious position to counter. Also, whilst you do evade the first punch, if your opponent becomes accustomed to your movements, you may eventually get timed and counted. The next style of head movement to consider is slipping towards your opponent. You could also consider tying in a straight duck, as it is sometimes used at a high level, and both of these movements involve lowering the head position and center of gravity. However, the difference is that slipping towards your opponent involves taking your head off the center line. This is probably one of the most dangerous forms of head movement as it relates to kickboxing or MMA, as you are slipping off to the side at a diagonal trajectory. Attacks using this trajectory are rare in boxing, but much more common in kickboxing and MMA due to the trajectory from which roundhouse kicks attack. But despite these risks, MMA fighters do regularly duck their head below the center line. Like many other strategies, it is also likely to get countered if timed and successfully predicted. The offensive advantages of slipping towards your opponent in an MMA context are debatable. In a boxing contest, slipping towards your opponent puts you in a great position to land body shots. In a 12-round professional boxing match, there may be an opportunity for these to add up. However, in MMA, there is likely going to be less time for these to add up due to grappling interruptions, so more immediate damage is required. It's possible that the level change of slipping may tease your opponent and make them wary of you shooting, but this seems unlikely as it is a counter, rather than a feint. In certain cases, countering the punch with a takedown may be a better strategy than slipping, though this will require a far greater energy expenditure. Another potential form of head movement that can be used is to roll under your opponent's punches. To an extent, the straight duck, slipping towards your opponent's punches, and rolling under your opponent's punches can be considered as movements that in some ways overlap with each other. Similarly, in certain ways, swaying at the waist can overlap with slipping towards your opponent's punches. Generally, it's likely that a biomechanics expert would say no two slips done in the heat of the fight are exactly the same. One might involve a 12-degree squat and 1-degree lean forward. Another may involve a 14-degree squat and 5-degree lean forward at the waist. MMA fighters and boxers have been seen to roll under punches by bending forward at the waist and squatting to some degree. Equally, you can sometimes see fighters rolling under punches by essentially doing a straight duck and combining it with footwork to get out of position of their opponent's punches. The next style of head movement is to lean back, pull back, lay back, whatever you want to call it. It has several different names depending on your region and gym. This is a versatile style of head movement, as it can be used to defend against both kicks and punches to the head. Although it can serve as a defense against both, there might be slight technical differences between the two. In boxing, the transfer of weight to the back leg creates a natural lean back motion. In Muay Thai, the lean back motion is sometimes accompanied by a degree of lean at the waist. The downside of the lean back is that once you have leant back, you essentially have to rebound your body into range, and you're quite immobile in terms of moving your feet in the lean back position. One final form of upper body movement is the shoulder roll. It does technically take the head away from the target, although it could easily come under the category of blocking or parrying. The only thing I will say about this is that it is, in my opinion, the highest skill level form of head movement, and usually involves a vulnerable low lead hand. So to wrap up the video, I will say let me know in the comments which form of head movement you think is the best. Personally, I think leaning back and using the pull counter are the best types of upper body movement for MMA. That said, it is possible to combine them all, as Anderson Silva showed for the majority of his UFC run with great success.